I just started my project and immediately we discovered so many defects. So what will happen later during these official testing phases, right?
Exactly when should the SAP API testing be used?
And we love cloud software as it is great from total cost of ownership. Yeah, you do not need to think about maintenance. Even you don't need to think about upgrade projects. But on the other hand, this is out of your control.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michał Krawczyk, and welcome to another episode of Navigating SAP API Testing. This is our show where we talk about why, how SAP organizations can test their integrations, which obviously are the backbone of digital transformations. If you've been following the Navigating SAP API Testing series, you've seen that we've explored already the why and a bit of how. And today, together with Michał Kowalczewski, we will try to touch a little bit more on the topic of when should you be doing the SAP API testing. If you can see a big SAP program in your pipeline, and whether this is an SAP S4HANA Greenfield implementation or maybe any other complex SAP program, or maybe even a BTP integration suite migration, then this episode is just for you. So welcome to the show, Michał. And maybe just to kick off things, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit more about your background in the SAP space?
Sure thing, Michał. So welcome everybody. My name is Michał Kowalczewski. I am a co-founder and CTO at Int4. And actually, my professional background was always connected into two things. One of them is SAP. I started working with SAP ecosystem just after graduation or even on the last year of my university. And the second one is system integration.
Okay, perfect. So Michał, if you could tell us, maybe let's jump start with this direct question. If you could tell us exactly when should the SAP API testing be used? I mean, let's start with this question. Can it be answered directly or not? Can you share us a little bit more about your view on this?
Yeah, so I believe that indirectly. Let's start from that. But actually, this is a very good, important question. And if you are responsible in your company for S4HANA transformation or iPaaS implementation, then I believe that definitely this is something that you should hear to. But on the other hand, when we look on this when, then I'm seeing here two dimensions. The first one would be related to use cases, as for HANA, iPaaS, a lot more. And I think that we will dig into this a little bit later. But there is also second aspect of this when, in terms of the timing. When we are having project in mind and we think that API testing is applicable, we also need to be conscious that there is a short momentum or short window when actually you can introduce test automation in general. As when you are planning your projects, you do that to avoid any risks. So everything needs to be prepared in advance. And implementation of any kind of automation, including API automation, takes time. So this should be correctly planned at the beginning of what you are trying to achieve in terms of the project.
Okay, and maybe Michał, if we can maybe start with the second one, with the second topic, because that's maybe we'll start from the top down approach. um, if I'm an SAP organization, what are there any kind of signals, or when should this light bulb pop up to my head when I hear something, and then immediately I should start thinking, okay, maybe now would be the time to start thinking about SAP API testing. Can
Mhm.
we distinguish some sort of signals like this?
Yeah, I believe that definitely there are some signals that just should tell us that there would be a value from API testing. Yes, and maybe I'm going to say a few of them. Number one, and I believe that we started from that, from this use case perspective. If you foresee a big SAP project ahead of you, uh, and you will probably, uh, again, we will focus on this a little bit later, but if you see either SAP S/4HANA or iPaaS, then definitely this is very applicable for API testing. The reasons behind that I will explain later. Um, Number two, in terms of the signals, if your organization has a complex supply chain, so if your industry is like retail, manufacturing, FMCG, consumer goods, then definitely API testing is for you. Uh, and why? Because if you are having complex supply chain, then it means that you have defragmented business processes, that these processes are taking place outside your IT landscape. It's even not about your SAP, but outside your landscape. They are happening within your customers and partners and vendors or whatever partners. And then if you would like to be able to conduct your project, you have these external dependencies. And it would be great if there is a way to simulate those external dependencies, because the people will be usually not available that have other tasks than you. Yeah?
And Michał, maybe just to dig a little bit more for the viewers. So you've mentioned that we should one of the signals is a big SAP program, like for
Yes.
example S/4HANA or iPaaS related integration platform related program. And the second signal you've mentioned is when the companies are of a specific industry. How do those two relate to each other? Do they have to happen? Do we need to or maybe the question that I'm trying to ask, can we only think about SAP API testing for our SAP S/4HANA implementations if we are in specific industries? If we, like you mentioned, like retail,
Mhm.
consumer
Yeah, so I
goods.
believe that this is just increasing the probability,
Mhm.
right? Because if there is complex supply chain, then it means that definitely there are high integration needs. But of course
Okay.
everything depends. Yeah, so we cannot never say zero or one if we would like to check if API testing is applicable or not. We are looking for the signals which are increasing probability.
And does the size of the SAP customer also matter in this case? Let's say, is it the same for if you're in, I don't know, top 10 or top 20 companies in the world, and maybe if you're number 50 in your own country, does it correlate somehow to this need, or
Mhm.
maybe we don't, for smaller companies we don't need to do that?
Yeah, in my opinion, definitely. But this is not top 10, top 20, but top 5,000.
Mhm, mhm.
Actually, the size, it's very often related to complexity, right? And if the complexity is high, then API testing that definitely brings a value, because this is rather to ask if there is a value from API testing or not.
What about the companies that do not participate in a complex supply chain but have a lot of interfaces? Does that also relate to the same thing, or?
Yeah, definitely. There is one significant difference. So we can say that
Mhm.
another factor of this would be that your company has a lot of non-SAP systems that are integrated with SAP. But there would be a significant difference between complex supply chain, so it means external systems, and non-SAP internal systems. But if we look on the typical project structure, you have associated to the project a budget and a team.
Mhm.
And in two cases, those external systems will be partially supported in your project. You
Mhm.
cannot expect that the people will be available on the same manner as your resources who are assigned full time to deliver your project. And of course, when we are talking about complex supply chain and external resources, it's even more difficult as they are
Mhm.
completely out of your control. They are having their own business goals, um, and they are just cooperating with your company.
So Michał, if I get this right, you mentioned currently you've mentioned four signals, right? The first one is having a big SAP program. This can be, let's
Hmm.
say, S/4HANA or any other big SAP program. The second one, the company usually has some sort of a complex, is usually within the complex supply chain, or you've mentioned that they have a lot of interfaces. So I'm assuming this could be interfaces with B2B partners, but you've also mentioned that another signal that the companies are having a lot of legacy or third-party non-SAP systems. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other signal that you can think of?
Mhm. You actually mentioned one new signal. If
Hmm.
you hear EDI or B2B integration, no matter if
Hmm.
this is supply chain or any other type of integration, this is definitely a signal that says that API testing is applicable. And this is again because these external dependencies, these are not your systems, that you do not have control on
Okay.
them and on the people who are operating them. And Michał, maybe I will make one step back, because I was
Hmm.
thinking about what you said about this, the size of the customer,
Hmm.
top 10, top 20.
Yeah.
So maybe we can even simplify it, and this would be another of these aspects when it can be applicable in general. And I believe that this would be number of interfaces,
Hmm.
no matter to what, yes. And we are very often saying if this is more than 100, then there is a space for API automation. It seems that this is a consuming task to be able to handle everything manually.
We're talking about SAP API testing, right? So we would be talking about SAP programs. If we have a look at about the variety of different SAP programs, I mean there's a lot of, right. We've got
Mhm.
just in SAP S/4HANA, we've got the Greenfield where we're implementing something from scratch. We have the blue field where we do some really really complex transitions, let's say merging systems, splitting systems, and we also have brownfields implementations where actually we do not do a lot of things, but yeah, we're still, this can still be a large program. Then we have the, as you mentioned, the integration platform, so iPaaS programs. We can have migrations. So one of the most popular right now to in the SAP space is the integration suite migrations. And I see also another question from Andreas, actually, where Andreas is asking, is it worth in technical upgrades? So if you could tell us maybe a little bit more how the SAP API testing can be, is it applicable to, let's say, all colors of the S4
Mhm.
HANA implementations and all colors or types of integration platform programs, maybe also to the technical upgrades. Could you share your view on this?
Yes, yes, sure. So basically, you mentioned multiple types of projects, yes, and I believe the most popular that we are seeing currently, these are S4 HANA transitions, both greenfields and bluefields, yeah,
I
and
think half
maybe
of half from what we're seeing is, from what we're seeing, at least from the reports that we're getting, at least half of the customers are actually doing greenfield implementations and half are doing something else. So this can be either some sort of a selective data transition,
yes.
or some companies call it, I think, a blue field. And then we've got the brown field, which are maybe something that Andreas was asking a little
Yeah,
bit more
so
about,
so
more
maybe
like a
let's start
technical
with
upgrade.
them, just to provide answer to Andreas. And you
Mhm,
are right that I'm also putting half of the projects into Bluefield basket,
mhm,
and there I understand it as brownfields, technical improvements, selective data transition. So these are all the situations where actually company needs to run regression
mhm.
to be able to confirm that the system that they are changing is still working fine.
Okay, so on one hand, if I get this right, on one hand, you're you're putting a lot of the programs into the, let's say, Bluefield box
Hmm.
because there needs to be a regression testing needs to be done. You mean SAP API regression testing? But for the Greenfield, is it the same? Because I guess there is no regression for the Greenfield programs,
Mm.
right?
No,
So
no, no, no.
is it even applicable, the SAP API testing for the Greenfield programs?
Yes, in Greenfield is applicable, but this is another aspect that under API testing, we forget that there is service virtualization and source system simulation.
Mhm.
Uh,
And could you
very
could
ra-
you explain a little bit more to our viewers? What do you mean by service virtualization and simulation?
Mhm. Yes, and maybe let's also discuss the nature of Greenfield, as
Mhm.
this is very rarely that all systems that are integrated with each other are implemented from scratch at the same time. Usually, if you have complex supply chain, there are already systems that you need to communicate. You exactly know what is the language that they are speaking, what are the messages that they are sending. You even might have some historical exchange from these systems with the previous environment. Now you are building from scratch, but only your SAP box. So it means that there would be a lot of requests of communication with these systems and with the people who are operating them. You will have a long build phase in the Greenfield project
Mhm.
where you already know your integration requirements, and you will need a lot of sample test data. You will need a lot of interface transactions just to be able to work on your SAP customizing, to be able to configure particular steps of the business processes. If they are interconnected with external systems, then you will have these dependencies that you will not be able to continue with your next step, which, for example, is outbound delivery in SAP, if you didn't receive sales order. So there would be a lot of need for interactions. And I believe that for that, you can use service virtualization.
And Michał, maybe just for the viewers, could you give us a real example? What does that mean? Can you describe a real case where the service virtualization was used? Can you tell us a little bit more about some history from your experience? How did this either SAP API testing or maybe only service virtualization work?
Yeah, so maybe let me refer to one of the projects that we supported with our solution, and this customer is still continuously using it, but for testing. But when we started working with them, this was a greenfield, and actually there was a bunch of
SAP Greenfield, you mean?
yes,
This
SAP
was an
greenfield.
SAP. Mhm, mhm,
Mhm. There was a bunch of consultants from one of the biggest GSIs who should prepare the configuration for this box,
mhm,
but there was a lot of interactions with their this was a retailer customer, so there was a lot of interaction with their systems that they had in shops, and basically they needed to work on the data received from these shops. This was the
mhm.
beginning of most of the business processes that they had in SAP. And actually, at the beginning, without service virtualization, the project was starving of lack of resources from these external non-SAP systems that could support providing the data.
Mhm.
And the resolution for that was service virtualization implemented in the self-service manner. So basically, customer was able to prepare in advance most of the typical scenarios that were inter exchange with these people from shops, and on that they prepared self-service platform that was working as a chat. It's now very popular direction with ChatGPT and all generative AI, but this was few years ago.
So
and
that
and
was not Juliet.
not Juliet, yes. And the
Okay.
consultants immediately they could speed up their work, just writing to the chat what exactly they needed from these source systems, what kind of data, and this was
Mhm.
immediately received to their development boxes, so they could continue the build process.
But Michał, if I get this right, for the Greenfield, you're saying that the SAP API testing in form of regression testing is not applicable.
It's not fully applicable, yeah, because it's not for the build phase definitely, and later
Mm,
on when you are starting typical test phases, then you always need to have regression, because right
mhm,
now we are very rarely working in the waterfall. We are working in sprints, in agile methodologies, and basically we are retouching same things multiple times, and we just need to ensure that we are not breaking anything what was implemented in the past. So I cannot say that the regression is not applicable for Greenfield, as it is, and it is very helpful. But the biggest value, this was by elimination those external dependencies through service virtualization. This is actually half of API testing, yes, that you need to mock the systems to be able to test the logic. And this mocking time to time is enough, and Greenfield is a very good example for that.
mhm. Okay, okay. So I understand for the Greenfield, and you've also mentioned that the other piece of the S/4HANA transformations you were putting in some sort of a, let's say, blue field box,
Hmm.
and those are the complex S/4HANA transformations. Those are the selective data transformations, and also brownfield. I think you've mentioned. I don't
Yes.
know if you can put technical upgrades also there.
Yes, we can. We can. Hmm.
Okay, but how do what is the difference? What is the difference here between the, let's say, the greenfield and those kind of programs,
Hmm.
if there is any?
Yeah. So I believe that there is one crucial difference, uh, that your partners or non-SAP systems, they even should not be aware that you are running your SAP project. Everything
Mhm,
what you are doing in this is isolated in terms that you had your old solution, you would like to replace it with a new one. But from the communication and integration perspective, everything should work as before. As this is the case for, let's say, 95% of integrations. Only five of them you would like, because you enrich business processes, you would like to also change the way how you are communicating with third parties.
mhm.
If this is 95, that it means that regression is something that is very crucial, and it's de-risking such projects and also minimizing the time needed to perform this change.
Okay, that does this also apply for example, you've mentioned at the beginning the integration platform related programs? Is it the same?
Yes, yes.
Or-
But maybe before that, let me share one of the customer stories. Actually, this is one of my favorite ones.
Mhm,
Uh, where this is about one of the largest FMCG customers in the world, that we provided them our platform and they were able to do the brownfield regression based on historical traffic. So basically, they collected
mhm,
thousands of transactions on their previous environment, and they were able to use this data for automated testing that was that was simulating those third-party systems and was comparing documents created in a new solution with the documents that were created in the previous one. And actually, this was a great success, but it started very good even from our post-purchasing survey, where customers said to us that they needed to build solution that would do the work that I described, or they needed to buy it. So actually, customer realized that there is a big pain and they will not be able to do it manually. This would be impossible to talk with these 10,000 partners just to request them, please, on the test environment, test our standard integrations, because we are replacing our heart of IT, which would be the SAP ECC into S4HANA. This would
mhm.
be impossible. So they already knew that they need to run with such approach. But then we had another unexpected conclusion or signal from the same customer, that, that when the integrator started massive testing within the approach that I described, they, on very early phase of the project, they immediately discovered a lot of defects. And
And what was
actually,
the phase? Since Michał, since we're talking about when did they start using this?
this
When was
happened
that?
just
This
after
is
technical conversion
but
from
but but but
ECC to S4HANA. So this was very early build phase, yeah?
okay, so in the build phase. So because very often we a lot of SAP customers tend to think that okay, regression testing, so this is something that is happening around the UAT. So when they immediately think, okay, it's UAT, is it was it? Can you share some
Yeah,
insights on how was?
this was much earlier, and this is this significant difference that it's very similar to iPaaS that we will speak in a moment.
Mhm,
That within such approach that you can massively test, you can apply test-driven development way of working. So you do not need to wait for UAT because you do not need to allocate resources as this is very costly. So this is the reason why you test so late because it's very costly to
mhm,
to get business people and disturb them from their work and to work with the system for the project. So within our approach that we had this big regression, we could start as early as possible. So and this was even at the beginning of the build phase. So this wasn't any official testing phase like the system integration tests or UAT. And actually, the team who was doing the testing, they bombarded customer with a lot of defects. And these
mhm,
defects were very accurate. They were related to integration, to master data, to customizing. And this even caused at the beginning some stress on the steering committee level
mhm.
that
Why
customer
is that?
thought, I just started my project and immediately we discover so many defects. So what will happen later during these official testing phases, right? And
Okay, okay, but
actually,
that
the story was a
mhm,
little bit different. That later on, when they started approaching regular testing phases, they discovered just few issues comparing to their previous projects that they were doing without massive API testing. So actually, this is a great confirmation for both test-driven development that it's working, but also this is a real example of shift left that
mhm,
thanks to the fact that we were able to test much earlier, then the total cost of project execution would be lower. As we need to remember that fixing the issues in the development phase is nothing comparing to fixing same issue during the UAT, that you need to go through all the official steps that you have in your process, right?
I don't know, to be honest, if a lot of people remember this because what we're seeing in SAP is very often quite the opposite. But yeah, and what would be your view? Why do the SAP customers still think that regression testing, this is something for the UAT? Was there, does the SAP API testing introduce a different possibility to do it earlier, or why still most of the SAP customers thinks when okay it's after UAT or around UAT? Why you're
Mhm.
saying that? Why is it that you're saying that it can be done earlier?
Yeah, so definitely there are multiple factors, and I don't know all of them. But I believe that API testing is bringing or it's closing a technological gap. That API testing is much faster than any other way of testing, especially if you can prepare your test cases within historical data, because in integration you know what are the messages that were exchanged and you know what are the documents that were created in the system, so you can combine it and create uh, the practically in the automatically manner the test cases that later on you can use for the regression. So definitely the answer would be that if creating the regression is relatively cheap, why do not start using it as early as possible?
Mm. Okay, so you're saying that it can be used earlier because there is the reference. We have
Yes,
the reference historical documents.
Yeah, and this is why
Okay,
it's
and
so good applicable into this blue field basket, including the technical improvements, like technical upgrades. Yeah, for example, like
mhm.
Andreas asked.
And what about the integration platform programs, either integration platform migrations, or that does it is it similar, or because you've also mentioned that the test driven development. Can you say a few more? Can you describe it maybe a little bit more for our audience that may not be familiar with this term?
Hmm.
What is it that you mean?
Yeah, so right now we have a lot of it's very trendy to replace our on-premise integration platforms with integration platforms available as services, so basically cloud platforms. And in terms of what were discussing here about regression, I believe that the answer for supporting the iPaaS transition projects is that it is even much simpler than testing S/4HANA. As you know, on S/4HANA, you have a combination of steps. Business processes are realized by integration through interface steps, by UI steps. There are dependencies between documents. Actually, this is complex, and you need to think about it correctly. Integration platform migrations, very often you can treat each interface as separate entity, and
Mhm,
then working with these historical messages, input, outputs, you can very quickly implement the full regression. And then what more is needed to be able to do the migration, for example, from non-SAP platform like Boomi into integration suite. You need to prepare your mappings, your code from scratch, because you cannot migrate from these two different platforms. But
mhm.
actually, you even do not need a detailed business specification, as if you can work in test-driven development and run your test cases for particular interface that you are implementing 50 times a day, you immediately discover all the rules that are behind it and that you need to include in your mapping. And
But when would you be doing this, Michał? So let's say I'm a developer and I need to migrate, as you mentioned, maybe a Boomi, maybe a MuleSoft interface, or maybe web methods to SAP Integration Suite. I'm a developer, and so how does it work? Do I design the mapping first, and then once I finish designing that, then should I do the testing again, or should I
mhm,
work in a different way from
yeah,
the when perspective?
the test-driven development means that you start your work from test preparation. So you do not think
Mhm.
about your mapping, you do not think about deliverables. You need to start with confirmation that you know how to test. And then you can work in iterations, and by that you ensure that the initial requirements are met by the test cases. But what I'm discussing, this is something that is applicable for every technical improvement project, which
Mhm.
includes iPaaS migration. These are the projects that we do not need to gather requirements, the business requirements, because we already know them. And actually, even there is a resistance from business people. They do not want to support you a lot in the technical improvement process, like this customer who is replacing Boomi with IS. Why business should care about it? This is
Mhm.
just to they are just they actually they expect stability, that IT will provide them stable solutions, so they do not care. And they also don't want to be involved a lot in terms of giving you specifications how you should build these interfaces, because first of all they did it once, and secondly they also left documentation. But we all
That's
know
true.
how it is with documentation, that it's outdated after some time, right? So
Or
actually
it
this
was stored on someone else's computer,
yeah
and it's lost.
yeah so actually
Okay.
this test driven development, this is the only way to conduct such project.
Okay, and so we've mentioned the SAP programs, the big S/4HANA transformations, the iPaaS. I'm just trying to think whether we've answered the question from Andreas. Does it also relate to BAU, a business as usual track somehow? Is it also relevant? Can we put this somehow into this picture?
Mhm. Yeah, and maybe we can even try to think about these technical upgrades also including the cloud.
Okay.
As actually, I think that this is a big elephant that we are having in our room. In the
And
past,
what do you mean by what do you mean by the cloud? Can you
mhm.
describe? Do you mean the move to the cloud, in
I'm
general,
just
or?
thinking about using cloud software, and
Mhm,
let me explain why. But before that, I will just refer to these technical upgrades. So
mhm,
in the past, in an on-premise world, you were rather expecting that the software that is delivered by your vendor is very, very stable.
mhm,
But I know a lot of examples that even that we were expecting that the software is stable, companies were deciding to have a strategy to be two service pack behind the latest versions from software vendors,
and why was that? Why
just
why
to
why did they?
ensure that there is really nothing. They wanted to wait till other people or customers will test massively this latest
Okay.
service pack before they will apply them. You know?
Okay, so they were sneaky in this way, but that is only possible, I guess, on the on-prem world, right?
Yes,
This is.
exactly. So this is why I said that this is a new elephant in the room. That this approach is not more applicable when we were working with cloud software, and we love
Mhm,
cloud software. As it is great from total cost of ownership. Yeah, you do not need to think about maintenance. Even you don't need to think about upgrade projects.
mm,
But on the other hand, this is out of your control. And no matter if you have on-prem or cloud, enterprises are building a lot of custom solutions based on this um, based on these products that are delivered from software vendors. So even if software vendor knows that their solution, the new version, works exactly as they wanted, that everything is tested, unfortunately, we need to run this testing also by our own.
okay.
And
But
in
but
the
you've
past,
mentioned but Michał, you've mentioned that the companies don't need to worry about the upgrades because it's done.
I just wanted to say that they don't need to worry about the standard components that are delivered.
Mhm, mhm.
But if you build custom solutions on top of that, then there is maybe not a very big, but there is a risk that something will start behave differently, and for that you need to have regression. Yes, and in on premise you had time, you could plan it, you can execute it manually, automatically. Actually, you could do it in both ways. In cloud, you do not have this time, as there is a 1 week notice, 2 weeks notice that they are upgrading your test environment, and just immediately after this time, they are upgrading your production. So actually, here test automation, this is a big relief because it is de-risking this and even decreasing this total cost of ownership. Yeah, knowing that by pressing of the single button, you can validate your on-top developments on your cloud solution that they are working in the way how you wanted.
Okay, so Michał, if I can maybe summarize the when do you do it for different use cases? So we've mentioned the SAP programs, the big S/4HANA programs, also the iPaaS migrations. So from what I get from you is that we can schedule it somehow according to the phase of the project. For some
Mhm.
of those, we can use SAP API testing during the development already. Then we can continue through the SIT integration testing, the UAT. But when we think about the cloud, it's different because in cloud we do not have this control, right? It's just it's happening either, I don't know, maybe quarterly, sometimes, I guess sometimes with SAP integrations with
Monthly.
it can even happen on the monthly basis, right? Okay, so the type of the program also defines the number of times that we will be doing that.
Yeah. And the ultimate goal is always to achieve continuous testing. That definitely you will have an immediate gain in your project. This is what we discussed: this different timing in Greenfield, different timing of using it in Bluefield. But then uh, that we are very often saying that the only constants is a change, right? That projects are run continuously. You have a lot of smaller projects that are classified as business as usual,
Mhm.
and every time when you already invested into test automation, you already achieved your regression, then you should run it as crazy, even every day, yes, or before every deployment to production, because it
Mhm.
costs you nothing, yes, comparing to the manual testing.
Okay, so I think we've got the test cases, the use cases covered in a way. So if I can summarize, we need to look at it from the organizational perspective. What is ahead of us? What is going to happen? Are we doing a big SAP program, or whether our industry has a lot of interfaces, whether we have a lot of dependencies? Then we need to have a look at the specific cases a little bit more, whether this is maybe S/4HANA Greenfield, maybe Bluefield, maybe integration platform migrations, or maybe we're going to the cloud. But now maybe if we can jump a little bit more to some of the questions. So I see David is asking a pretty big question. I do not I will not read it the whole one. I will just maybe iterate. So David is asking more on the scope of SAP API testing. So David is saying that they have APIs in PO doing some change, some RFC lookups to the S4. Then they are also using SAP Integration Suite doing a similar thing. Then they are also doing some OData changes. So I think the question from David is more related on what is the scope of the SAP API? What does that mean? And David, in one of the previous sessions, we also tried to discuss when do we do the API SAP API testing. But maybe since we have a new guest over here, maybe Michał can share a little bit more.
So you started from this SAP APIs, and I believe that there is a huge difference between SAP and other packaged apps software. That in our APIs in SAP world are very often asynchronous. So it means that you cannot use classical testing approach with well-known tools like Postman or others, because sending request means nothing. You do not know what happened with this request later on. Yes, and within our solution at Int4, we are able, and this is also how we call the nature of API. We are able to dig into integration platform where practically every integration scenarios within SAP is implemented on the integration platform. We
Mhm.
are able to work with these different flavors and different integration platforms. And then we are having the whole interface layer in ECC S/4HANA boxes. The layer called ALE, IDOCs, proxies, whatever, and everything, of course, is supported by Int4. But we are looking even one step further, that we are working on the final documents that were created in the database, like sales orders, invoices, deliveries. So, and maybe this is applicable to the question that we had, that if you are having different flavors of integration, or even old ones like RFCs, IDOCs, and now you are replacing them with the new ones, you can still use test-driven development, as your
Mhm.
partners are still sending same, let's say, artifact messages, and your sales order in the system still looks in the way like before. So we have ability to, independent on the technology which is behind the scenes, we are able to test those scenarios.
Okay, thank you. So David, If we answered the question, please let us know. If we didn't, just let me know. But I think the conclusion on what Michał said is that the idea behind the SAP API testing is that we would check the whole SAP API layer, starting from the integration platform up to the SAP ERP system. And this can be ECC or S4HANA, but we need to think about integration in a holistic way. I mean,
Yeah.
we cannot just test the integration platform, right, for the SAP programs, because it's just testing a part of the interface.
Yes.
So
Yes.
when we're talking about testing SAP APIs in this series, we're mostly talking about testing the whole SAP interface as a single component. And this can run on the integration platform, it can run on the SAP backend system, but we're trying to look at it from the whole component. And this is why we're discussing topics like integration platform testing, but also testing interfaces for the purpose of SAP S4HANA programs. So Siddhartha is asking, can Int4 API testing be used for testing APIs created on other platforms like Mules?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yes. We are supporting multiple integration platforms, including Boomi, Web Methods, MuleSoft, Informatica. Time to time, there are needed some customizings or some small changes in how the platform is processing messages, that just to be able to deliver this persistence to Int4. But in general, we are working not only with the SAP integration platforms.
Okay, so as we mentioned, Siddhartha, we're trying to look at the SAP API testing from the holistic perspective. So we're looking at the interface in whatever kind of integration platform there is, or whatever kind of protocol. As long as the messages are interchanged with the SAP, then this is something that we're trying to cover in this series of SAP API navigating through SAP API testing series. If you would like to find out a little bit more, please stay tuned for the next episode of Navigating SAP API Testing. We also have an SAP Press book called Testing SAP APIs: Strategy and Execution, where you can find out more about all of the topics that we're trying to cover here. And also on the OpenSAP platform, there is an OpenSAP course on showing you how you can test the SAP APIs and how to do the service virtualization. We will post the link on the LinkedIn forum, so you can always go there. And these are the OpenSAP are free training, so you can do it at any time at your own pace. Thank you, Michał, and hopefully we will see some of you guys during our new session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.